If you flew anywhere in the 1950s, you were probably on a propeller plane. The Lockheed Constellation, the Douglas DC-6, these were the kings of the sky. They were reliable, proven, and most importantly, they made money. But Boeing was about to bet everything on something airlines thought was completely insane. In 1952, Boeing started working on a jet airliner called the 367-80, or the Dash 80 as it became known. This wasn't just a new plane. This was a $16 million gamble, which in today's money would be over $180 million. And here's the crazy part. They didn't have a single order for it. Not one airline had committed to buying this thing. Boeing was building it entirely on spec, using their own money. The airlines weren't interested because jets seemed like a terrible idea for commercial aviation. Sure, military jets were fast, but passenger jets? The fuel costs alone would kill you. Jets burned through fuel at rates that made propeller planes look economical. Pan Am, TWA, United, they all looked at Boeing's proposal and basically said thanks, but no thanks. There were real concerns too. Jets flew higher and faster than anything passengers had experienced. Would people even be comfortable at 35,000 feet? The cabin pressurization systems needed to be perfect. One failure, and you'd have a catastrophe. Engine reliability was another massive question mark. Early jet engines were known for being temperamental. They'd flame out, they'd surge, and they needed constant maintenance. Boeing's own engineers had doubts. The company had never built a commercial jet before. They were known for bombers like the B-47 and B-52, not passenger planes. The risk was enormous. If this failed, Boeing could go under. But there was one man who believed in it completely. Bill Allen, Boeing's president. He saw what others didn't. He knew that if jets worked, they'd make propeller planes obsolete overnight. The question was whether Boeing could prove it before they ran out of money. The Dash 80 first flew on July 15, 1954. It was painted in Boeing's brown and yellow colors, and it looked absolutely beautiful in the air. The test pilots came back raving about it. It was smooth, it was fast, and it handled like a dream. But the airlines still weren't buying. United Airlines sent their chief engineer to check out the plane. His report was brutal. He said jets would never be economical for domestic routes. The fuel consumption was too high, the maintenance costs would be insane, and passengers wouldn't pay enough extra to make it worthwhile. American Airlines felt the same way. They'd just invested heavily in new propeller planes and weren't about to throw that money away. Pan Am's Juan Trippe was interested, but cautious. He wanted proof that jets could actually work in real-world conditions, not just test flights. He wanted to see range tests, reliability data, and most importantly, he wanted to see if passengers would actually book tickets on a jet. There was genuine fear that people would be too scared to fly on something so new and fast. Boeing decided to do something dramatic. In August 1955, during a demonstration for airline executives and military brass at an air show near Seattle, test pilot Tex Johnston did a barrel roll in the Dash 80. Not a gentle turn, an actual barrel roll, a complete 360-degree revolution with a prototype passenger jet. Boeing's president nearly had a heart attack watching it. Johnston's stunt could have ended his career, but it did something incredible. It showed that the 707 wasn't some fragile experimental aircraft. It was strong, it was capable, and it could handle stresses that would tear apart older planes. The publicity was massive. Suddenly, everyone was talking about Boeing's jet. But talking didn't equal orders. Airlines were still skeptical about the economics. Douglas Aircraft was working on their own jet, the DC-8, and they were telling airlines to wait. The competition was heating up, and Boeing still didn't have firm commitments. The financial pressure was building. Every month without orders meant Boeing was burning through more cash with nothing to show for it. October 13, 1955. That's the date everything changed for Boeing. Pan Am's Juan Trippe walked into Boeing's offices and did something that shocked the entire aviation industry. He ordered 20 Boeing 707s for $269 million. But here's the twist. He also ordered 25 Douglas DC-8s at the same time. Trippe wasn't putting all his eggs in one basket. He was hedging his bets, playing Boeing and Douglas against each other, but it didn't matter to Boeing. They finally had an order, a real, actual purchase commitment from one of the world's biggest airlines. The gamble was starting to pay off. The order sent shockwaves through the industry. If Pan Am was going all in on jets, maybe there was something to this after all. Within weeks, other airlines started calling. American Airlines, which had been so skeptical, suddenly ordered 30 jets. United, TWA, Braniff, They all started placing orders. It was like a dam had broken, but now Boeing had a different problem. They actually had to build these things and build them fast. The production facilities in Seattle weren't ready for this kind of scale. They needed to hire thousands of workers, set up new assembly lines, and figure out how to manufacture jets at a pace never attempted before. The 707 itself was evolving rapidly. The original design was too small for what airlines wanted. Pan Am and the others demanded more seats, longer range, and bigger engines. Boeing went back to the drawing board and stretched the fuselage by 10 feet. They added more powerful Pratt & Whitney JT3C engines. Each engine produced 13,500 pounds of thrust, which was absolutely massive for the time. The engineering challenges were enormous. The wings had to be redesigned to handle the extra weight. The fuel system needed to be completely reworked. The landing gear had to be stronger to support a plane that would weigh over 257,000 pounds fully loaded. Every system on the aircraft was being pushed to limits never tested before. Boeing's engineers were working around the clock, solving problems that had never existed in aviation before. The pressure was incredible, but the orders kept coming in. Douglas wasn't sitting still. Their DC-8 was being developed at the same time, and they were making bold claims. They said their jet would be better than the 707, more fuel efficient, more comfortable, and more reliable. Airlines were watching both manufacturers closely, trying to figure out which horse to back. The DC-8 had some advantages. It was designed from the start to be bigger than the 707. Douglas engineers had learned from Boeing's early designs and made improvements. The cabin was slightly wider, which meant more comfortable seating. They also promised better range and lower operating costs. Some airlines, like United, went with Douglas specifically because of these features, but Boeing had one massive advantage. They were first. The 707 would enter service before the DC-8, which meant Boeing would have real-world operational data, while Douglas was still in testing. That head start mattered enormously to airlines. They wanted to know jets actually worked in day-to-day service before fully committing. There was also the British competition. De Havilland had built the Comet, which was actually the world's first commercial jet airliner. It started flying passengers in 1952, years before the 707. For a while, it looked like Britain would dominate the jet age. But then, disaster struck. In 1954, two comets disintegrated in midair, killing everyone on board. The investigations revealed catastrophic metal fatigue around the windows. The cabin pressurization cycles were causing tiny cracks that eventually led to explosive decompression. The entire Comet fleet was grounded. De Havilland redesigned the plane, but the damage was done. Airlines lost confidence in British jets. Boeing learned from the Comet disasters. They obsessed over metal fatigue, redesigning window shapes and using different riveting techniques. Every part of the 707 was tested beyond anything required at the time. Boeing engineers would pressurize fuselages over and over, simulating years of flights, looking for any signs of weakness. They knew that one catastrophic failure would kill the entire jet age before it started. The memories of those Comet crashes haunted everyone in the industry. Boeing couldn't afford a single mistake. December 20th, 1957, that's when Pan Am's first 707 took its maiden flight in airline colors. The plane was stunning. It had a sleek, swept-wing design that made every propeller plane look ancient. The four engines hung below the wings in pods, a design that would become iconic. When people saw it, they knew air travel was about to change forever. But getting to that first flight had been brutal. Boeing's test program was the most extensive ever conducted on a civilian aircraft. They flew the 707 in every imaginable condition: extreme cold in Alaska, desert heat in Arizona, high-altitude tests in the Rockies. They tested engine failures, hydraulic failures, electrical failures. They wanted to know exactly how this plane would behave when things went wrong. One of the biggest concerns was something called Dutch roll, a combination of yawing and rolling that could make the plane extremely uncomfortable or even uncontrollable. The 707's swept wings made it particularly susceptible to this problem. Boeing engineers installed a yaw damper system, basically an automated system that would counteract the oscillations before passengers even noticed them. The testing revealed other issues too. The engines were incredibly loud, much louder than propeller planes. Residents near airports were already complaining during test flights. Boeing had to work with Pratt & Whitney to develop quieter engine designs. They added sound-dampening materials to the cabin. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. Range testing was critical. Airlines needed to know exactly how far the 707 could fly with a full load of passengers and cargo. Boeing ran flight after flight, measuring fuel consumption at different altitudes and speeds. They discovered that flying higher, around 35,000 to 40,000 feet, was significantly more efficient than lower altitudes. This became standard practice for all jet operations. The cabin itself went through constant refinement. Pan Am wanted luxury. They installed wider seats than propeller planes, added mood lighting, and created a galley system that could serve hot meals to over 100 passengers. The pressurization system maintained a cabin altitude of 8,000 feet even when flying at 40,000 feet. For the first time, passengers wouldn't need oxygen masks or feel sick from altitude. October 26, 1958. Pan Am Flight 111 took off from New York's Idlewild Airport, now known as JFK, headed for Paris. It was the first scheduled transatlantic passenger jet flight, and it changed everything. The flight took just 8 hours and 41 minutes. Propeller planes took nearly twice as long. The 111 passengers on board experienced something completely new. The cabin was quieter than they expected, though still louder than modern jets. There was no vibration from propellers. The ride was smooth, almost eerily smooth. When the plane climbed to cruising altitude, passengers could see the curvature of the Earth. They were flying higher than most had ever been. The media coverage was enormous. Newspapers around the world ran stories about the jet age arriving. Life magazine did a photo spread. Everyone wanted to know what it was like to fly at nearly 600 miles per hour. Pan Am's ticket sales exploded. People who had never considered flying overseas were suddenly booking trips. The 707 made the world feel smaller. Other airlines rushed to get their 707s into service. American Airlines launched domestic jet service shortly after Pan Am's transatlantic flight. TWA, Braniff, Continental, they all followed within months. Routes that used to take all day now took a few hours. Los Angeles to New York went from 8 hours with stops to just 5 hours nonstop. It was revolutionary, but the transition wasn't smooth for everyone. Pilots trained on propeller planes had to completely relearn how to fly. Jets approached airports differently, they landed faster, and they required new techniques for takeoff and landing. Airlines set up extensive training programs. Pilots spent weeks in simulators before touching a real 707. The economics were proving the skeptics wrong. Yes, jets burned more fuel, but they could fly more trips per day. A 707 could make 2 round trips across the Atlantic in the time a propeller plane made one. The revenue per plane was significantly higher. Airlines that had hesitated were now scrambling to order jets before they got left behind. Boeing's production lines were running at full capacity, and they still couldn't keep up with demand. The early days of jet service weren't perfect. In fact, they were pretty rough. The 707 had problems, some serious, that needed to be solved quickly. Airlines were betting their futures on these planes, and Boeing had to make sure they worked reliably. Engine failures were more common than anyone wanted to admit. The Pratt & Whitney JT3C engines were powerful, but they were also temperamental. Compressor stalls would cause loud bangs and loss of thrust. Foreign object debris, even small birds, could cause catastrophic damage. Airlines were seeing engine issues on a regular basis, which meant costly delays and maintenance. There were also incidents that scared everyone. In 1959, an American Airlines 707 crashed into the East River during a training flight, killing all aboard. Investigations revealed pilot error, but it highlighted how different jets were to fly. In 1962, an Air France 707 crashed on takeoff in Paris, killing 130 people. The cause was pilot error again, but it showed that the margin for mistakes was smaller with jets. Runway requirements were another major issue. The 707 needed longer runways than most airports had. Cities scrambled to extend their runways, but it was expensive and time-consuming. Some airports simply couldn't accommodate jets, which meant airlines had to reroute their services. Smaller cities that used to have direct flights suddenly found themselves cut off from the jet age. The noise problem got worse. Not better. Communities near airports were furious. The roar of 4 jet engines on takeoff was unlike anything they'd experienced before. Local governments started passing noise ordinances. Some airports imposed curfews on jet operations. Boeing had to go back and retrofit planes with sound-dampening modifications. Maintenance costs were higher than projected. Jets needed specialized tools, specialized training, and specialized parts. Airlines had to build entirely new maintenance facilities. The old hangars designed for propeller planes weren't big enough or equipped for jets. The investment required was enormous, and smaller airlines struggled to keep up. But despite all these problems, the 707 kept proving itself. When it worked brilliantly. Passengers loved it. The speed, the comfort, the prestige of flying on a jet, it created demand that propeller planes simply couldn't match anymore. By the early 1960s, the 707 was everywhere. Pan Am was flying jets to every continent. BOAC, Lufthansa, Air France, Qantas, airlines around the world were operating 707s. The plane had become the symbol of modern air travel. If you wanted to be taken seriously as an airline, you needed jets. The impact on global travel was staggering. In 1958, before jets, about 55 million passengers flew on scheduled airlines worldwide. By 1965, that number had more than doubled to over 130 million. The 707 didn't just take passengers from propeller planes, it created entirely new travelers. People who would never have considered a 15-hour flight to Europe were now booking trips. Business travel was transformed. Executives could fly to London for a meeting and be back in New York within 2 days. International business expanded rapidly because face-to-face meetings became feasible. The 707 enabled globalization in ways that are hard to overstate. Companies could operate truly international operations because their people could move between continents quickly. Tourism exploded. Hawaii became accessible to middle-class Americans. European vacations became realistic for families. The Mediterranean, the Caribbean, destinations that were once only for the wealthy became achievable for regular people. Hotels, resorts, entire economies were built around the accessibility jets provided. The 707 also became a military workhorse. The U.S. Air Force ordered modified versions as aerial refueling tankers, designated KC-135 Stratotankers. These planes are still in service today over 60 years later. The Air Force also used 707s as cargo planes, reconnaissance aircraft, and eventually as Air Force One. When President Eisenhower started using a 707 in 1959, it cemented the plane's status as the pinnacle of aviation. Culturally, the 707 represented modernity and progress. It appeared in movies, on magazine covers, and advertisements. Airlines competed on who had the nicest 707 interiors. Some installed piano bars, some had sleeper berths, some offered 5-course meals. Flying became glamorous in a way it had never been before. People dressed up to fly. It was an event, an experience, not just transportation. The 707's dominance lasted about 15 years before newer, more efficient jets like the 747 and DC-10 began replacing it. But by then, the 707 had already accomplished what it set out to do. It proved that jet travel was economically viable, safe, and something passengers actually wanted. It launched the modern era of aviation. Boeing built 1,010 Boeing 707s between 1957 and 1979. That might not sound like a lot compared to later planes, but each one represented a shift in how airlines operated. The last commercial 707 passenger flight was in 2013, operated by Saha Air in Iran. That's over 50 years of service for some airframes. Not bad for a plane airlines once mocked. The 707's DNA is in every Boeing jet that came after it. The 727, 737, 747, 757, 767, they all borrowed design elements, systems, and engineering solutions from the 707. The basic layout of a modern airliner, the swept wings, the podded engines, the pressurized cabin systems, they all trace back to Boeing's gamble in the 1950s. What's really remarkable is how close it came to never happening. If Bill Allen had listened to the critics, if Pan Am hadn't taken a chance, if any number of things had gone differently, we might be living in a very different world. Air travel might still be a luxury for the few rather than something hundreds of millions do every year. The airlines that mocked the 707 learned a hard lesson. Innovation looks risky, sometimes it looks stupid, until suddenly it's the only way forward. The carriers that adapted quickly thrived. The ones that resisted eventually had to follow or die. That's still true in aviation today. You can still see 707s flying occasionally. Some cargo operators still use them. Military versions are still in service around the world. When you see one, you're looking at the plane that made modern air travel possible. It's the plane that shrank the world, connected continents, and proved that sometimes the biggest gambles pay off in ways nobody could predict. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My friend, who is a chimerical pilot, said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories about airlines and the realities of modern travel like this deserve to be told. Help me show her that these videos matter. Please subscribe to the channel and let's keep these stories from being buried.